In the Kirby Air Riders Direct, Masahiro Sakurai brought up the apparent similarity of his new game to Mario Kart. And on the surface, this does indeed seem strange. Another franchise racing title from Nintendo, not 6 months after the last one. Now, for a good number of particularly more dedicated fans of these things, I suspect Sakurai did enough while explaining all the details of Kirby Air Riders mechanics to assuage fears that Mario Kart World and his new game are going to be very distinctive experiences that are worth enjoying in their own right. But to the casual audience, this may seem like an odd move, and even some dedicated Switch 2 players may feel a bit of racing burnout. And yet, Sakurai reports that he was asked to produce the Kirby Air Riders game by the big boss of Nintendo's whole game development wing, Shinya Takahashi. It was, as Sakurai put it, a strong request from him and also Satoshi Mitsuhara, who was the head of HAL Laboratory at the time. So, what happened? First of all, I think Sakurai's own statement explains a lot of this. He was working on DLC for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate and so was unable to, as he put it, get around to the request. I don't think it's necessarily the case, therefore, that Plan A was for Air Riders to be a Switch 2 exclusive during the system's launch window. It certainly seems that Sakurai slowed down at least a little by his lofty standards during the second Fighters Pass, and a good thing too for the man's own sanity. Then he took a break to create his YouTube channel, although that doesn't seem to have taken him too long. I've heard it quoted, though I can't find the source, that Sakurai stated that racing games are relatively quick to make. Of course, that wouldn't take into account mission creep. Nintendo's hope might have been that Sakurai would take on Kirby Air Riders as a relatively quick title that would be a palate cleanser before he returned to Super Smash Bros. For the Switch 2. It's seeming to be the case that he wanted to do something a little different after dedicating so much time to Smash for the previous decade. Here's how I can imagine that it might have gone. It seemed completely plausible to me that when the plan was sketched out, the initial idea was to release the game in the March of 2024. Why that date? Well, a few things. Firstly, it's 3 years after Super Smash Bros. Second Fighters Pass wrapped up, and so a decent size of development period for a mid-sized game like Air Riders. Secondly, HAL generally likes the February or March window for their big games, and although this isn't created by them, it's still a HAL property, and HAL have a very predictable rhythm for these things. They tend to put smaller titles like Kirby Fighters 2, Kirby's Dream Buffet, and now the Star-Crossed World DLC for Kirby and the Forgotten Land into the August or September window. But big retail releases are almost always right before the end of the financial year. Forgotten Land was March, Return to Dreamland Deluxe was February, Kirby Star Allies was March, Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn was also March. From Nintendo's point of view, their 2023 to 24 financial year was a very big and very important one. They started with the Mario movie, then had Zelda Tears of the Kingdom and Pikmin 4, and wrapped up in October with Super Mario Bros. Wonder. What they didn't have was a major game to close out the financial year, which historically they tend to have had for their big years. For example, Animal Crossing closed out the year, which included the Switch Lite. Princess Peach Showtime, which released that March, was fine as far as it went, but it's hardly in the same league. Note also that the following quarter of that year had just 3 titles. Endless Ocean, which was a third-party game essentially, just published by Nintendo, and then 2 remakes in the form of Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door and Luigi's Mansion 2 HD. Nintendo isn't averse to going heavy with the remakes, but they usually do mix them up with some newer games as well, and that makes me think that at some point one was planned. It feels to me like the early part of 2024 was missing something, and I believe it's at least plausible that Plan A was for Kirby Air Riders as a kind of big last Switch title before the Switch 2 released. At that point, perhaps with the intention of the Switch 2 releasing either late 2024 or early 2025. But Sakurai is not the sort of person to just rush off a quick game. He would obviously want to utilize the power of the Switch 2 once he saw it coming over the horizon, and once Air Riders slipped out of the 2024 financial year, the reality would surely have struck that a Sakurai title makes for an absolutely amazing launch window game, even if it's not necessarily the Sakurai title that they were hoping for. One problem was solved, but another came into being. What to do about Mario Kart? And the answer seems to me to be nothing. Nintendo has had this problem before. They released New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, Yoshi's Crafted World, and Super Mario Maker 2, all within a 6-month window of each other, and with almost no major games in between. They released Super Mario RPG, Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, and Mario and Luigi Brothership in the space of 12 months. Having clashes of genres may bother fans, and it may even bother the marketers at Nintendo, who have a headache trying to sell the games, but I don't think Nintendo worry too much about these things from a development perspective. I think their key thing is whether or not the games will be good and whether or not they will have longevity. It's interesting that Sakurai always frames these discussions as a response to Nintendo's requests. He responded to their specific request for Kirby Air Riders. Now, I'm sure this is very true, but I suspect there's a bit of diplomacy here as well. But I think it's very likely that this does represent something that Nintendo wanted. From Nintendo's point of view, while it's not smash big, Kirby is a great choice for a new game and has to be, of the likely options, their second choice, if not Smash. It is one of their biggest franchises, and it gives the series a high profile going into a new console generation. From HAL's point of view, of course, they absolutely want a constant stream of Kirby content, and the aura around Air Riders, due to Sakurai's involvement, is a great way to tangentially boost sales of Forgotten Land and other Kirby projects, although I am a little surprised that Sakurai didn't even mention Starcross World, as it's due to release so soon. Fans may want Kid Icarus or something new from Sakurai entirely, but why would Nintendo ask for these when the sales would inevitably be far lower than it would for Kirby, and Kirby would also sell a huge amount more merchandise and other content off the back of this one game? If there must be a game before the next Smash, and Sakurai seemed determined that there would have been, Kirby is the logical choice for Nintendo. It's also one that will be difficult to delay any longer without tipping their hand, as with the advent of the Nintendo Switch Online Classics GameCube app, they needed to make a decision about whether or not to release the original. There aren't, after all that many GameCube games that are first party that can be released. They could have held it back like Super Mario RPG was kept back from the Super NES app, but it's more elegant to have a game before Air Ride's absence starts to become too noticeable. So, why are Nintendo so blasé about the two franchise races? Here's the thing. Day one sales are a tiny part of the picture for a Sakurai title, and certainly a tiny part of the picture for a Mario Kart title. These games are designed to be evergreen. In year 5 of the Switch 2, hardly anybody will even remember that these two titles launched almost next to each other, and Nintendo will want these titles to be selling in year 10, and in the case of Air Riders especially, to continue selling long after that, as I'm sure they don't plan to revisit the title anytime soon. I also think that they're leaning into these smaller franchises a lot more with the launch window of the Switch 2. Mario Kart is, of course, an absolutely huge title, but they really put a big emphasis on the franchises that usually get overlooked during this early Switch 2 period: Kirby, Metroid, and Donkey Kong. The 3DS and Switch both have the triptych of 3D Mario, 3D Zelda, and Mario Kart in the launch year. The Wii U didn't, but, well, it was the Wii U. But I think in the case of Switch 2, they realised that their Megaton franchises are big enough to cause huge ripples whenever they launch at this stage. They have tons of Mario games on Switch still to sell when the movie hits, and the Nintendo Switch 2 editions of the Wild titles mean that they have two major Zeldas that they can sell as new and as evergreens. Donkey Kong would never have got the same kind of attention if they promoted Mario as being just around the corner. It needed to stand alone so that it could stand tall. Metroid Prime hasn't been given quite the push yet I would want for it, but I think it would be eclipsed by a new Zelda if one were imminent. Putting franchises like these early on draws attention to them. It suits the core audience, who are most early adopters of these kinds of games anyway, as many will be fans of these franchises, and so it gives a good chance of some of these titles perhaps benefiting from the same kind of excitement surge that took Breath of the Wild and Splatoon 2 to unprecedented heights after 2017. It also guarantees Nintendo something that is very hard to maintain and even to get in the first place, and that is momentum. By keeping their powder dry on 3D Mario, Zelda, Splatoon, Animal Crossing, and Smash, even if it's by necessity, they haven't emptied the options box for later. These franchises are coming, of course they are, but with each new release, Nintendo can build the sense that the console is just getting bigger and better constantly, with major new announcements always just around the corner. This is going to be a long generation if Nintendo has anything to do with it, and they are pacing themselves and ensuring that they have momentum for the future. In this context, putting Kirby, a franchise that's normally out of the holiday window, right into their biggest selling slot of the year with their most superstar developer behind it, is a massive statement of confidence in the pink puffball. The fact that it's another franchise racer is far less important in this sense than that the franchise has prominence and buzz and will get attention, a rising tide that hopefully will inflate many previous Kirby titles as well. Of course, this is all just a theory. It's unlikely we will ever really know, as Sakurai is too diplomatic and Nintendo has no reason to discuss its internal workings in this way. But this is my interpretation of the most likely outcome from this otherwise rather strange turn of events. And I must say, as someone who has previously pointed out the fact that it's odd that Nintendo doesn't have more racing titles on the books, I hope that this and the launch day drop of F-Zero GX on the Classics app suggests that Nintendo will start to pay a bit more attention to their racing games, including, I would love to see, more of F-Zero and Wave Race. Thanks as ever for watching. Please consider sharing or checking out the Patreon, as it helps a lot. I've got some massive stuff in the pipeline for the next few months, so thank you for watching as ever, and I will see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.